There is a moment, sharp and unforgettable, when a man realizes the silence of the woman he once took for granted is no longer a tactic, no longer a plea for his attention, but the final act of sovereignty. It strikes him not in the warmth of daylight, but in the hidden corridors of his mind at night, when her absence has grown heavier than her presence ever was. You know this moment, because it is the instant where power shifts. The one who leaves the labyrinth of longing carries the crown, and the one who remains trapped in his projections is left pacing in the shadows of regret. The painful truth is that men rarely regret in the presence of a woman's voice. They regret when the echo is gone. They regret when the space where she once stood now mirrors their emptiness back at them. This is not the regret of romance. It is the regret of exposure, the unveiling of the shadow they tried to avoid. He thought her silence was weakness, a retreat from battle, but it was sovereignty cloaked in mystery. The woman who withdraws is not abandoned, she becomes untouchable. Here lies the hidden paradox. Men crave the very thing they cannot control. When you withdraw into the shadows, you confront his deepest archetype, the fear of the devouring void. Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine image each man projects onto women. When she steps back, that projection collapses. He is forced to face the fractured mirror. He sees not her, but his own hunger. The regret he feels is not about losing her body, but about losing the fantasy that shielded him from his own emptiness. And here is the strategy buried inside this darkness. Sovereignty is not loud. It is not a weapon waved in anger. It is the quiet retraction of your energy, the refusal to be food for a man's unhealed shadow. Every step you take into your own silence forces him to face his. But you must ask yourself, do you walk into the shadows to punish, or do you walk to claim yourself? The answer will shape the entire journey. Notice how his obsession rises not when you are available, but when you are absent. This is not an accident. It is the cycle of trauma, the unfinished wound from his childhood where love was uncertain, where attachment was laced with fear. When you embody detachment, you awaken the child in him who once cried into silence. That wound reopens and the man must decide. Will he evolve or will he chase illusions? His regret is not simply about you. It is about the ghost of abandonment he never faced. Yet the danger is real for him and for you. If you fall into the trap of performing withdrawal only to lure him back, you remain tied to his cycle. The true shadow work is colder, harder. It is the act of choosing absence not as manipulation but as medicine. It is walking into the labyrinth and sitting with your own silence until it becomes power. And when you emerge, you are no longer prey to his projections. You become the mirror that cannot be broken. This is the moment that terrifies him, because deep down he knows that once you carry your crown into the shadows, you will not return as the same woman. You will return as the sovereign, and his regret will be permanent. The mythology of his control dissolves, and in its place, he meets the reality of your autonomy. Jung would call this individuation the breaking of false masks, the birth of the true self. For you, it is the rising of the queen. For him, it is the death of the fantasy. But what is left unsaid is darker still. Regret does not end in silence. It festers. It turns into obsession, into fantasy, into attempts to reclaim what was never his to begin with. And it is here, in the forbidden borderland between his hunger and your sovereignty, that the true battle begins. Because when you walk into the shadows, he does not only lose you, he loses himself. And that loss is more dangerous than any weapon. And so the question lingers. When he realizes the truth of what he lost, will his regret drive him into his own transformation, or will it drive him deeper into the labyrinth of obsession? The answer remains hidden, waiting in the silence where your shadow and his collide. Regret is not born in the light. It festers in the dark corners of memory, where the mind replays what it cannot repair. A man who once dismissed her silence now hears it everywhere, like an unfinished chord haunting the background of his life. He sees her shadow in the mirror, But the mirror no longer lies. It shows him what he has become without her reflection to soften the edges. This is the torment he never speaks of. The secret regret he buries under bravado, distraction, and fleeting conquests. Because to admit, it would mean admitting that the woman who vanished into the shadows carried something he cannot replace. This is not romance, it is archetype. When she leaves, she does not simply walk away from his body, his home, or his bed. She withdraws the projection of the anima, the psychic balm that kept his inner. Fractures stitched together, and without it he collapses inward. Jung wrote that what a man fails to confront in himself, he seeks desperately in a woman. But when the woman awakens and withdraws, she rips away the bandage. Suddenly, he is left exposed, and exposure burns deeper than loss. You know this cycle, even if you have never given it words. You feel it in the way men often return, circling back after months or years, not because they love, but because they cannot bear the silence that revealed their shadow. It is not you they chase. It is the illusion of themselves they lost when you reclaimed your sovereignty. They remember the way your energy once soothed the cracks in their armor. They remember how your presence shielded them from themselves. And their regret is the recognition that they were never strong without you. They were merely distracted. Here lies the paradox that haunts both sides. The woman fears absence will make him forget, but it is absence that etches her into his psyche like fire across stone. The man fears confrontation with his own shadow, but it is that very confrontation that offers him the key to individuation. And yet, most resist. Most would rather chase the ghost of her presence than sit in the silence of their own abyss. This is why regret becomes obsession, because obsession is easier than evolution. Strategy unfolds here like a blade, sharp, simple, and dangerous. Do not return to soothe his regret. Do not step out of the shadows to reassure him of what he already knows. Every time you do, you rebind yourself to his unhealed wound. Your power lies not in returning but in remaining. Remaining in your sovereignty, in your silence, until his regret either transforms him or destroys him. That choice is his, not yours. And that is the freedom of feminine sovereignty. You no longer carry the weight of his evolution. But let us descend deeper. Why does regret cut men so sharply when a woman steps away? Because loss of control pierces their archetypal foundation. The masculine ego thrives on dominance, on the illusion of possession. When she withdraws, she does not merely take her love, she takes the proof of his power. He realizes, perhaps for the first time, that love was never his to command. That realization is unbearable. It forces him into contact with the shadow of helplessness, the very thing he built his persona to avoid. And you, if you remain in your sovereignty, become the archetypal mirror, not the mirror that reflects his fantasies, but the one that reflects his truth. Few men can face that reflection without breaking. Yet the ones who can, they are rare. They are the ones who transmute regret into transformation. They are the ones who descend into the labyrinth not to chase you, but to meet their own shadow. And only then can they emerge worthy, not of you, but of themselves. This is the hidden essence of the feminine withdrawal. It is not a punishment, it is initiation. Not all will survive it. Many will crumble into bitterness, projecting blame onto the woman who dared to step away. But the chosen few, the ones with courage to face their shadow, will rise. They will transform their regret into sovereignty of their own. And in that alchemy, a man ceases to be haunted and begins to be whole. Yet until that day, his regret remains his prison. It stalks him through the silence like a specter. He cannot chase it away with noise, with new bodies, with shallow victories. For the shadow knows. The shadow whispers in every quiet hour. The shadow reminds him, she was never yours, she was only a mirror. And when she walked into the darkness, you were left staring at yourself. But what happens when a man's regret hardens into hunger? When instead of breaking, he chooses to pursue the phantom. What happens when his desire to reclaim her turns into something far more dangerous than love, an obsession forged in the fires of his own shadow? That is where the labyrinth grows darker still, and where the story deepens into a place few dare to follow. Obsession begins where regret refuses to die. At first, it is a quiet pulse, a lingering memory that surfaces when the world grows still. But soon it mutates, sharpening into a blade of fixation. He cannot let her go, not because he loves her, but because her withdrawal has revealed the hollowness within him. She has become a symbol, a myth inside his psyche, a figure both haunting and irresistible. To the wounded masculine, absence becomes more intoxicating than presence ever was. This is where the labyrinth tightens its grip. The man begins to weave fantasies, rewriting history in his mind to soothe his fractured ego. He tells himself she will return, that she secretly longs for him still, that her silence is merely a test of his persistence. These are not truths. They are projections, illusions built to protect him from the unbearable weight of his own shadow. Jung warned that what remains unconscious rules our lives from the dark, and here in this unconscious spiral, regret transforms into obsession. You know this pattern. Perhaps you have seen it in messages that arrive months later, dripping with false humility and veiled longing. Perhaps you have felt it in the way he reappears when you least expect, as though summoned by your very detachment. But the truth is harsher. He is not drawn to you, but to the reflection of himself he lost when you stepped into sovereignty. He chases you to avoid facing his own emptiness. His obsession is the mask he wears to hide from his fear. And here lies the feminine danger, to confuse his obsession with devotion. Obsession flatters, but it is poison. It pulls you back into the labyrinth, tempting you with intensity that feels like love but tastes of chains. If you are not vigilant, his regret can become your cage, because obsession does not seek to honor you, it seeks to possess you. And sovereignty cannot be possessed. The strategy here is one of ruthless clarity. When he reappears cloaked in longing, you must see through the projection. Ask yourself, is this man facing his shadow, or is he running from it? Has his regret birthed growth, or has it hardened into hunger? The answer will determine whether his presence can coexist with your sovereignty. If the obsession lingers, you know the truth. He has not descended into his own darkness. He is still clinging to the illusion of control. Notice how silence becomes the crucible. Your withdrawal confronts him with a choice: descend inward or collapse outward. Few choose the descent. It requires facing the devouring void within, the fear of abandonment carved into the psyche since childhood. It is easier to chase you than to confront the wound, easier to project than to integrate. And yet, the only path to liberation lies through that descent. Until he chooses it, his obsession will stalk him like a shadow he cannot outrun. But let us look deeper. Why does obsession feel so potent, so magnetic, even to the sovereign feminine? Because shadow recognizes shadow. His hunger speaks to the part of you that once craved to be chosen, to be seen, to be the center of his universe. That echo can stir your own unhealed wound if you are not careful. This is where sovereignty must evolve from performance into embodiment. It is not enough to withdraw. You must remain rooted in the labyrinth until your own shadows have been faced. Only then can you look upon his obsession without being lured back into its trap. Think of the mirror again. In the beginning, you reflected his fantasies. When you walked away, you reflected his emptiness. Now, as obsession grows, you reflect his hunger. Each stage forces him deeper into confrontation, whether he accepts it or not. And each stage forces you to choose. Do you remain the mirror, untouchable and sovereign, or do you allow his projection to define you once more? This is the crucifixion of feminine power, the temptation to become what he imagines rather than what you are. And so the labyrinth unfolds with sharper stakes. His regret has become obsession, his hunger has become pursuit. The shadow is restless, whispering in his ear, urging him to reclaim what was lost. But shadows never ask, they take. This is where the woman's sovereignty must become more than silence. It must become the crown forged in fire, because obsession does not fade easily. It tests the boundaries of your sovereignty, presses against the walls of your silence, searching for cracks. The question now emerges, heavy and unavoidable. When obsession presses against sovereignty, what happens? Does she hold her crown, unmoved in the shadows, or does she risk stepping back into the labyrinth of his projections? The answer will determine not only his fate, but hers. Obsession presses like a storm against the walls of her sovereignty. At first, it is a knock at the door, a whisper in the night. But soon it becomes a pounding, relentless and hungry, seeking any weakness in her silence. The man cannot bear the void she has become. He feels her absence as a wound, and instead of healing, he claws at it, desperate to make it bleed with her presence again. This is the most dangerous phase, not because he has power, but because he has none. And the powerless man, bound to his shadow, becomes the most unpredictable of all. It is here that the archetypal struggle sharpens. She, the sovereign feminine, sits within her shadows, learning to wear them as a crown. He, the fractured masculine, circles the labyrinth, seeking a way back to her light. But every path he takes only leads him deeper into himself, a confrontation he does not want. His regret has turned into fire, but fire without direction burns everything it touches. And so he knocks, he begs, he schemes, not realizing that the more he grasps, the further she dissolves from his reach. For you, the lesson is sharper still. Obsession is not proof of value. It is proof of absence, his absence of wholeness, his absence of control, his absence of self. To mistake it for devotion is to confuse hunger with love, and hunger left unchecked devours. This is why so many women are pulled back into cycles of regret themselves, mistaking intensity for intimacy. But sovereignty sees through the storm. Sovereignty knows that devotion is steady, grounded, born of inner strength, not desperation. Here lies the strategy hidden in the shadows. Maintain silence not as performance but as essence. Do not withdraw only to wait for him to chase. Withdraw to remain within your own labyrinth until the shadow no longer tempts you with the echo of his hunger. Because if you return too soon, you will not meet a man, you will meet his obsession. And obsession is never satisfied. It does not want you whole. It wants you broken enough to feed its need. Jung taught that the shadow, once ignored, demands projection. And obsession is projection in its rawest form. He projects salvation onto you, believing that your return will cure his emptiness. But the truth is brutal. No woman can heal a man's refusal to face himself. To try is to become captive, dragged back into his labyrinth, where his shadow becomes yours. This is the danger of empathy without boundaries, the queen abandoning her crown to become a servant of his wounds. Yet there is also potential hidden in this fire. For the rare man willing to confront his regret honestly, obsession becomes the doorway to transformation. His hunger forces him to see that what he longs for cannot be reclaimed externally. He must descend into the underworld of his own soul, face the child abandoned within, and integrate the shadow he once denied. This is individuation, the only path where regret becomes awakening instead of prison. But this path cannot be walked for him. It must be chosen by him, in silence, in darkness, without your hand to guide him. And your role is not to rescue but to reign. The mirror you hold is not his fantasy anymore. It is his truth. The longer you remain in sovereignty, the sharper the reflection becomes. He will either shatter before it, breaking into bitterness and blame, or he will use it as the blade that cuts him free from illusion. That is not your burden to decide. It is his fate, written in the shadows he has tried to avoid. Think again of the motifs that linger: the labyrinth, the mirror, the crown. Each has evolved. At first, the labyrinth was yours. You walked into the shadows to reclaim yourself. But now it is his. He wanders lost, chasing echoes of you that no longer exist. The mirror once reflected his fantasy, but now it reflects his lack. And the crown, once invisible, rests firmly upon your head, forged in silence, sharpened by patience, untouchable to his grasp. Still, a haunting question lingers like smoke. What happens when obsession cannot reclaim, when sovereignty cannot be broken, when silence becomes eternal? Does the man finally surrender to the descent, or does he turn his regret into rage, seeking to destroy the very mirror that reveals his emptiness? The shadows hold the answer, and they whisper that the final trial is yet to come. Rage is the shadow's final disguise. When regret no longer draws her back, when obsession fails to bind her, the fractured masculine often turns to destruction. It is not always physical. It is psychological, emotional, archetypal. A man undone by his own shadow will seek to dismantle the mirror that reveals him. He will try to rewrite the story, to call her cold, heartless, ungrateful, even cruel. For him, rage becomes a refuge, because it is easier to burn the image of her sovereignty than to confront the truth of his own weakness. This is where the woman must embody her darkest discipline. Silence is no longer just absence, it is resistance. To remain sovereign in the face of his rage is to prove that his shadows have no power over her kingdom. This is not passive endurance, it is active mastery, because sovereignty is tested not when men adore you, but when they turn against you. It is easy to wear the crown when loved. It is far harder when attacked. Yet it is here in this crucible that the crown is forged in gold. You have felt this before. The moment when his words cut not because they are true, but because they reveal his desperation. The moment when he tries to drag you back into the labyrinth with blame, guilt, or manipulation. But sovereignty does not descend to argue with shadows. It does not bend to the distortions of regret. It remains still, unbroken, letting the fire burn itself out. And this stillness is what terrifies him most. Because when he realizes even rage cannot move you, he confronts the full emptiness within. The shadow has no more masks left to wear. And here lies the revelation. His secret regret was never about losing her. It was about losing himself. Her absence forced him into contact with the void, and every reaction, obsession, rage, pursuit, was an attempt to avoid that ink. But the labyrinth does not release those who run. It only deepens. Until he stands still, until he faces the reflection without turning away, he will remain bound. His fate is silence, not hers. This brings us to the hidden gift buried in the archetype. Feminine sovereignty is not only about walking away, it is about transforming what follows. Her silence becomes a trial for him, yes, but it also becomes initiation for her. By refusing to be consumed by his obsession or his rage, she learns to dwell in her own shadow without fear. She integrates her darkness, discovers that her worth is not measured by his reaction. This is individuation from the feminine side, no longer the mirror of his fantasies, but the embodiment of her own essence. Here strategy takes its purest form. Do not defend, do not explain, do not justify. For every word you speak in response to his rage, you re-enter the labyrinth he built. Let silence be your fortress. Let sovereignty be your shield. The storm cannot last forever, and when it dies, you remain untouched, crowned, and eternal. In this stance, you embody the wisdom of both Jung and the Stoics, that true mastery is not in controlling another, but in ruling oneself. But the story does not end in rage. The shadows are not so simple. For some men, the collapse that follows rage is the beginning of transformation. Exhausted, broken by his own projections, he may finally see the truth, that she was never his possession, that love cannot be controlled, that the shadow he avoided was always his to integrate. In this rare moment, regret becomes revelation. He enters the labyrinth not to chase her, but to meet himself. And if he endures that descent, he emerges no longer haunted but whole. Still, this outcome is uncertain, and sovereignty cannot wait for it. A woman who walks into the shadows must live as if he will never follow. She must choose her path as if his transformation will never come. Because her power is not dependent on his evolution, it is dependent on her own. To tether her worth to his awakening is to hand the crown back to him, and the crown cannot be given. It must be kept. The labyrinth is nearly complete. The mirror has revealed its final image. The crown has been forged through silence, through obsession, through rage. But the question remains, echoing through the corridors. When she emerges fully sovereign, what becomes of the man left behind? Does he rise, or does he remain forever trapped in the prison of his own shadow? The final ascent is near, and with it, the last revelation. The final revelation does not arrive with thunder. It comes in silence, like a crown lowered upon the head of the woman who chose the shadows over surrender. She walks out of the labyrinth not as she entered, trembling, uncertain, seeking his gaze for validation, but as sovereign, complete, untouchable. The mirror no longer binds her to his projections. The shadow no longer frightens her. She has learned that absence is not emptiness, it is power. And in this awakening, she carries a truth that shakes the very foundation of his regret. Because his secret regret was never truly about her absence. It was about his blindness to her presence. The nights he dismissed her voice, the moments he chose ego over intimacy, the ways he fed his hunger while starving her soul, these are the regrets that fester when she is gone. He does not grieve the woman before him now. He grieves the woman he failed to see when she stood in the light. And that regret is the heaviest of all, for the past cannot be undone. The crown she wears now cannot be stripped. You feel the weight of this, don't you? The realization that the most haunting punishment is not revenge, not anger, not even hatred. It is the quiet permanence of sovereignty. When you refuse to return, you become the lesson he cannot escape. You become the echo he carries, the archetype of the anima that no other woman can fully replace. His regret is eternal because your silence became sacred, and sacred things cannot be touched. Here lies the final strategy, the deepest secret of feminine sovereignty. Never seek to make him regret. That is still bondage. Walk into the shadows for yourself, not for him. The moment your absence is performance, it loses power. But when your absence is truth, it transforms everything it touches. It teaches him what no words ever could. It teaches you what no validation ever gave. This is the paradox. The less you try to be seen, the more unforgettable you become. The motifs are complete now. The labyrinth, once a place of fear, became the ground of rebirth. The mirror, once fractured by his projections, became the weapon of truth. And the crown, once invisible, now rests with weight and certainty, proof that you walked into the shadows and returned whole. This journey was never about punishing him. It was about unveiling you. Sovereignty is not loud, not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, elemental. And it is this quiet that haunts him forever. But let us not romanticize his fate. Some men do not rise. Some remain broken, circling endlessly in the labyrinth of regret, chasing shadows that never return. They become bitter, lost, forever trying to fill the void with substitutes. This is not your burden. Sovereignty means letting him face his destiny without interference. His regret belongs to him as your crown belongs to you. You do not wait for his transformation. You do not tether your sovereignty to his choice. You reign regardless. And yet, for those rare men who face their shadow, who turn regret into revelation, something extraordinary occurs. They no longer chase her absence. They face their own. They meet the abandoned child within. They confront the hollow hunger. They integrate the darkness they once denied. And when they emerge, they do not return to reclaim her. They return to reclaim themselves. Only then can they stand not as broken pursuers, but as sovereign equals. And in such a meeting, sovereignty recognizes sovereignty. The final verdict is stark, sharp, undeniable. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. She does not beg for love, she embodies it. She does not fear abandonment, she transforms it. She does not return to soothe his regret, for that is his initiation, not hers. Her task is only this, to walk through the shadows and return crowned. Everything else is his path to carry. So ask yourself, where are you still bound to the regret of another? Where do you still perform absence to be missed instead of living absence to be free? And what would it truly mean, to walk into the labyrinth of your own shadows, not to punish, not to lure, but to reign? The crown is waiting. The mirror is ready. The shadows are open. The choice, as always, is yours.